Why do we hear so much, but remember so little? I woke up in a panic a few years back, realizing despite hearing it, I didn't know my grandpa's braised pork recipe. To many of you here, you might be wondering, it's just braised pork, what's the big deal? But let me reassure you that this juicy, succulent braised pork, it could have saved the world. Well, this braised pork means a bit more to us than what's just on the surface too. Like many other Chinese family, our family didn't really celebrate love or respect through kind words or even hugs. We did it through food. So before Grandpa passed away, he bestowed upon me this traditional family recipe and all the great memories we made with him. What I didn't know at the time was that losing this recipe was about to teach me one of the hardest lessons that I've ever had to learn. That isn't enough to listen. In fact, it isn't enough to actively listen. We need to listen from within. A few months before Grandpa passed away, I tried to make him feel heard as much as possible. So I was practicing all the active listening techniques that I picked up. I was nodding, making eye contact. I was even paraphrasing so he knew that I was listening. And it worked. We had some of the best conversations of my life. But what I didn't know at the time was that active listening is really great at making the other person feel heard, but terrible at making sure that you are actually listening. And strangely, by active listening, I missed out on this recipe, the gold nuggets of wisdom he's trying to pass down to me and the stories. Riddled by how we can listen better, I embarked on this journey to figure this thing out. Unfortunately, as a medical student, I'm equipped with all the tools to nerd this thing out in the library and to dig into the science. So I turned my 2-hour-long medical lectures into my personal listening laboratory. Through this journey, I distilled 4 core principles that we think about listening, but less commonly practiced. And today, I'd like to share that with you today and to show you how that's fundamentally transformed how I work, live, and connect with others. To tell you about the first principle, without getting too nerdy, I will use my grandpa's favorite phrase, that outstanding things are by definition outstandingly hard to get. Or, if Grandpa ever went to the gym, he probably would have said, no pain, no gain. In many ways, he's got this right about listening too. When experimenters looked at how we engage with information by using different amount of effort, they realized the more we put in, the more we seem to retain. Kind of makes sense, right? But paradoxically, when we think of good listening, we think it's smooth sailing, it's easy, and we can do it any time. But when in reality, we need to embrace that challenge and put in the effort. This is really because our working memory acts as a bit of a barrier between what we are hearing and what we are actually retaining. So our brain's working really hard when we're listening well to figure out what to throw out and what to really keep. And therefore, good listening takes effort. And remember, no pain, no gain. The few months before Grandpa passed away, you can see him visibly getting skinnier, and it was pretty hard for him to talk as well. But Grandpa being Grandpa, he kept telling me these stories and tried to pass on the golden nuggets of wisdom. Unfortunately, I was in my head, trying to think of the perfect, empathetic response. I'm sure you'll have that experience too. When you're having a great conversation with a friend, and the next thing you know, this little voice comes from the back of your head going, think about this. And you're in your head, the friends slowly get muted. You try to come out of it, but that's already too late. You've missed out on one of the most important points they were making. Hey, were you just tuning out? Thank you for the honesty. Well, that's the first thing you can do, to pick up on the cues when we're getting distracted. And then from there, we can leverage one of the most powerful thing that we have. Einstein says, he's not particularly talented. He's just curious. In fact, curiosity is the superpower here. We can use curiosity to direct our attention and energy to integrate the information in a way that's meaningful to us. In fact, when studies looked at how people tell each other dramatic stories, that's really hard to do, by the way, the listener who are curious immerse themselves in the story emotionally, can enhance the storytelling by many folds. They essentially started co-authoring the story. How cool is that? So, be passionately curious. Empowered by my new realization, I went to visit grandma, not wanting to make the same mistake that I made with grandfather. So, I was listening curiously. I was putting in effort. I was trying to remember every word she's saying. And next thing I know, I was zoning out. I got overwhelmed. And I actually stopped listening. I was frustrated, but got curious again. Could the opposite of no pain, no gain be true as well? When we're listening so much that our brain is exerting too much energy and we are actually falling off of a cliff. When I dug into the literature, I found that it's true. Listening is about the balance. Think of our working brain while listening like trying to pack the perfect backpack for a long hike, where the distractions, interruptions, or even emotions from early in the day are like those unnecessary weights that we pack in the backpack. They doesn't really add to the journey, but weighs us down. So we need to engineer our conversation to minimize these distractions and to focus on what truly matters. On the other hand, what we're hearing are the essential things that we need to retain and make sure we're capturing. But what if those are getting really complicated and overwhelming? Fortunately, cognitive science has given us quite a few good strategies for this too. The best thing you can do when things are getting overwhelming is to paraphrase what you heard into your own words, or even better, come up with an analogy that demonstrates what the other person is trying to convey. That in turn helps us bridge the gap between working memory and our powerful long-term memory. When we tune into our internal and external stresses when we are listening, we can manage more easily and strike the balance between what's intense and what's manageable. The fourth principle I'd like to share with you today is vulnerability. As a guy, saying the word vulnerability still cringes me out, so in the name vulnerability, let's talk about it. I'm sure you all had that feeling before when you're in a lecture or in a meeting, you're so curious about something that you want to put your hand up, but something's stopping you. It's the butterflies in your stomach. Capture that. That's one of the most powerful things that we can use to listen. Well, how so? We all know going out of our comfort zone is really good to help our understanding and develop ourselves. But we often miss out on the fact that how vulnerability can help others engage on our own challenging journey. Well, when it comes to listening, this can take a form of a scary question that might show you something that you didn't really know, or maybe didn't really want to know. When I was telling my dad about these listening principles and vulnerability, he, out of the blue, said, "Jack, do you think we can be mates?" I was shell-shocked. This is the same guy that used to give me lectures, so I'm in tears, so he can give me another one on how I didn't manage my emotions. He's the definition of a tiger parent, and I did not expect this from him. But when I looked over, I see him going a little red from the awkwardness of the conversation. And please don't tell him that this will be on the internet for the rest of his life. I was extremely grateful for the vulnerable conversation that he started. By acknowledging the awkwardness with a question, he broke the barrier between connecting and communicating. By starting this vulnerable conversation, we connected on a level that we never had before because he acknowledged his bias, allowing me to speak, knowing that he's there to listen, regardless how difficult things might get. And that is truly listening from within and with vulnerability. Well, now empowered by the 4 principles of listening through the cutting edge of science, and much distaste for the online active listening articles, what I didn't realize is Grandpa just taught me another beautiful piece of wisdom on how I can engage with the world more genuinely and listen with intent. In this strange world, we pretend to listen a little bit more than we actually do. Are you picking up on the cues when you are not listening, or you can enhance your listening? The next question is a little scary for me, so I guess I'll ask it. What's that one vulnerable question that you are meaning to ask that somebody? Today, I'd like to invite you to think of that question and ask them. Then, All you got to do is just listen.